Welcome, everybody, to our virtual work session of the Annapolis City Council for Thursday, February 20th, 2025. We'll call this to order at 3:06 p.m. At this time, would everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States, to the republic, indivisible. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the first item on the agenda?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. The first item on the agenda is a presentation, or the only item on the agenda is presentation ID 4925, update on 2025 City of Annapolis's municipal election.
Wonderful. Well, we have our Board of Supervisors of Elections Chair, the eminent Ms. Leahy, here. Would you mind coming up to the table? No, because we're not doing business.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, we've got an easy script today, so I'm turning the floor over to you.
Well, I'm one of those people I have to write it down, so I didn't get a PowerPoint put together, but I figured this way you can refer to it if need be. So, but anyway, so thank you for the opportunity. I specifically wanted to meet with you all, as we've done before, past elections, to just update you on what the plans are, but also what might be new. And in this particular year, we've had quite a few code changes that I want to make sure that everybody's aware of, in large part so that, you know, if you're asked by constituents, you have the right answer, or, you know, just let one of us know and we can follow up with it. You know, the board, it consists of Debbie Yatzik, who is the Republican on the board, and myself, and then Liam Mercer joined us in December. So I think he's been at 2 meetings, so, but he's doing a great job and has been oriented. And then Keanu Smith Brown was with us from March 2022 to July of 2024, and so he also figured significantly in a lot of these changes. As you all, I think, know, we're aided by Regina Watkins Eldridge, Ashley Leonard, and then I don't know if you've had a chance to meet Teresa Buccalo, who is the elections administrative assistant. And in this particular year, we've also had a lot of assistance from Cynthia Reuter in terms of helping us with the legislation. David Garris continues to be a support person for us at the State Board of Elections on now the director. So he will continue he and his staff have been very generous in their time. Code changes I'm going to cover are mostly things like the mail-in ballots, the ballot question, canvassing, campaign fund reporting, and then I'll also cover in-person voting and some other issues, and certainly welcome, you know, questions and thoughts. As you may remember, in 2021, mail-in ballots were sent out to all eligible voters, registered voters in Annapolis, in large part due to COVID. Ballots could be returned either through the post office or at any of the 8 drop boxes. It was considered accessible, convenient, safe, and we had an increased voter turnout of 40%, which is the highest we've had in a while. The anecdotal observations of that is that it allowed particularly people such as maybe older voters, maybe voters that had a difficulty getting out during the day on the in person, but it did seem to possibly hit a pocket of voters that we haven't been able to access in the past. So we were very happy with that.
Can I ask you, Ms. Leahy, just out of curiosity, you said 40%. Do you happen to, off the top of your head, was that pretty uniform across wards? Or did we see, no?
I have that information if you want it.
Thank you.
It does vary. Of course, I printed it out very small. I can certainly give you this. It varies from about, this is broken out in the different categories, but some of the areas that had the higher percentage was Ward 1, Ward 2. There was one that I forgot, it was a lower percentage than I expected. But I'd be happy to share this with you if you want to look at it. One thing, if you look across parties, unaffiliated had the highest percentage in the general election that cast ballots, then Democrats, and then Republicans. That's interesting. In regards to 2025, 01824 was adopted to eliminate absentee ballots and to replace it with a vote by mail option. So this is consistent with the Maryland Board of Elections. So it'll be somewhat similar. All voters will get the opportunity to apply for a vote by mail or a mail-in ballot. The big change, unfortunately, we can't tap into the county system where somebody has already said, I want a mail-in ballot every time. So they have to apply for the municipal. It's a separate application process. So that's one of the critical elements. We want to let people know, if you already think you're getting a mail-in ballot because you got one for the presidential, that's not going to happen. And if you don't have an application filled out, you're not going to get a ballot. If someone gets a ballot and then decides they want to vote in person, they can, but it will be a provisional ballot.
Thank you. When they receive the mail-in ballot application or request application, as you're saying, Annapolis Board of Elections or County Board?
Oh, it'll be Annapolis.
Okay.
Coming from Annapolis. They'll be sending it, but everything will have Annapolis on it.
And my question also on that front, if someone requests a ballot be sent to them for the primary election, are they then automatically sent one for the general election?
My understanding is, because we haven't seen the drafts of them yet, my understanding is that you check off, you get one application and you check off which one you want.
Got
We
it.
really encourage people, if you're going to do one for one, do it for both.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I believe there's a separate check off.
And if you check it off to get one in 2025, you're not automatically getting one in 2020.
Not at this point, no.
Okay. Thank you.
It's a separate, it's all software.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
all mail-in ballots will need to have a signed oath, which is consistent with other voters. We will be curing, which is something that hadn't been specifically in the code. And when we talk about curing, that is when the ballot envelope comes back in, it's looked, if the oath is not signed, which is they can see in the window, they will be, if there's time, and there's usually, I forget what the cutoff date is exactly, but they will be called or communicated if there's an email available, they'll use that, or they'll do a phone call to ask them, do they want to come in and sign the oath? Because the oath has to be signed in order for the ballot to be counted. And so that, again, is something that's consistent with the state. Ballots will be mailed with return postage paid, but it must be postmarked by election day and received by the board no later than 10 a.m. the Tuesday after the election. So those dates are September 23rd and November 11th. Voters can also deposit their ballots in one of the 8 ballot boxes around the city. So if you live in Ward 4 and you want to drop it off on your way to work in Ward 2, you can do that. You don't have to put it in your ward box. And just as in the past, these will be monitored 24/7 by camera surveillance. They will be open until 8 p.m. on Election Day, or at least in that ward, if they have somebody in line and the poll is still open, they'll still keep it until it's locked. And then all the ballots are picked up on Election Day, and it's the drop boxes are locked, and they're usually taken away the day after the general election. On a daily basis, once... Sure. Okay. On a daily basis, once they are delivered to their sites, which will be about 30 days before the primary election, they are emptied twice a day by a trained bipartisan staff from the county. So they will come, they will pick them up, and they take them directly back to the election office. So they are secure, and then they are kept securely at the election office. Did you have a...
Yeah, I just had two quick questions. For the Dropbox location, How is the selection done? Is it just based off of maybe high volume of traffic, or how do you choose where to put the drop boxes?
Well, the drop boxes last time were outside of the polling locations, and so we're anticipating the same. What we look for in placing them was convenience. Certainly, that includes transportation routes, which we've looked at in terms of polling. Is there camera access? In all of the sites that we have, there is camera access with the exception of Mount Olive, which has, we bring one in. The police department assists us with that. But that's usually the same thing. So people know that that's a polling location, so they can vote there, they can drop off their boxes.
And the mail-in votes counted ahead of the primary or after? I think you said they pick them up after.
So they're picked up, I'm sorry, I kind of went backwards on that. They're picked up on a daily basis, but the box is locked at 8 o'clock on election day.
Okay.
So you have to have gotten it in there. And they actually lock the box so that people can't continue to put them in. Now, if they're mailed by the U.S. Postal Service, as long as they're postmarked by election day and received by the Tuesday after, they'll be accepted.
So do we have, I remember though, there was some issue, it was with the state election, I think, and I'm wondering if that impacts us. Mail-in ballots are counted ahead of the primary deadline, and that counts towards, election night totals, or
Right.
do we wait until?
I'll get to that when I talk about
sorry.
canvassing. That's okay. Good question. We actually encourage people to use the drop boxes. We found that they're a bit more reliable. I hate to say that than the Postal Service. I know Alderman Pindell Charles has had challenges with the mail in the past. Surprisingly, people use the mail more than they used, if I recall correctly, use the mail rather than the drop boxes. But we do encourage people to use them. And I think there's a different trust level now that we've been through a few cycles with drop boxes. One of the things I want to mention in terms of the mail-in ballots and something that has been brought up a lot is the accuracy of the voter rolls. Certainly, that's something that is of not necessarily, it warrants attention from the Board of Supervisors of Elections, as it does with the county. Election ward maps have been updated based on the redistricting that had occurred in the city. But we have to wait until April for the county to actually get some of that information out. They have, at their level, a public information window of some sort. But I did check this week, and the election maps are current, and they are up on our website here at the city. If someone is unclear about whether they want what ward they might have switched to, they can call the election office, and they'll be assisted with that.
Gay?
Although the maps are switched for public-facing reference, assignments do not switch, though, correct? We're still to operate within the confinements of the old ward boundaries?
Yes, I can answer that. So yes, even though we are now advertising the new ward boundaries so folks know where to vote, you and me, we each, I still represent Truxton Heights. You don't get it just yet.
Right. Okay. So, okay. Also, just as information, Maryland is part of a group called ERIC, which is the Electronic Registration Information Center. In the past, there have been up to, say, 32 states, including the District of Columbia. Unfortunately, a number of states have pulled out of it, but we are still part of it, and there's 24 states in the District of Columbia. What they do is they're a nonprofit organization that shares voter information on deaths, duplicates, and also address changes across the members. So if you want to...
May I just interrupt you real quick? Just now that we have 5 of us, I'd want to do a roll call so we're fully in compliance. Not sure how much of a difference it makes, but real quick, we'll start with Alderman Huntley, present. Alderwoman O'Neill. Alderwoman Pindell Charles.
Present.
Alderwoman Finlayson. Not present. Alderman Chandlemeyer. Not present. Alderman Gay.
Present.
Alderman Savage,
Present.
Alderman Arnett, not present. Mayor Buckley, not present. Okay. Don't know if that was how necessary that was. Our city attorney just stepped out, but
That's okay.
just wanted to make sure we
Better
cover our
safe than
bases.
sorry.
Thank you.
Oh, great. All right. So continuing on with talking about the mail-in ballot process, we were talking about addresses. So voters are responsible for changing their own addresses. I know a number of people say, well, why can't I go in and I change my kid's address, or I can't That's what leads to fraud. So it's not the easiest process, but it is a process that we're hoping will help, because I believe in the last election, when we mailed ballots out to everybody, there was a large number, I would say well over 1,000, that were returned or were not in the appropriate places. The way we tell people to deal with that, if you were, this is in 2021, if you got one of those ballots, right on there, not here, send it back. But I think that will change a lot, because we're only sending it to people that have applied. But again, we're still trying to work on the accuracy of the rolls.
So if you get a ballot, for some odd reason, maybe the person is moved, I open it. How are they using a tracking database to match signatures, or how are they verifying that the applicant, the individual receiving the ballot, is the one in fact signing the ballot?
Whoever fills out the ballot signs an oath saying it's them. There is no signature verification. There is ID verification when a person first votes.
Okay.
But the state of Maryland does not do signature verification. In large part, and one of the reasons, I shouldn't say large part, signatures change over time.
Mm-hmm.
There is software that is available that can do some of that analysis, but also signature verification is also different than ID verification. Two different things.
Is that something that in the future the committee would recommend that we look into? I'm just curious then if it's sent in, it counts as a vote.
Correct. But in this case, if you're living at 110 Main Street and you've made that application, the ballot should come to you at 110 Main Street. If you move to 110 Smith Avenue, you should have, what we need you to do is to call the Board of Elections and say, I've now moved. I need that changed.
And
I think also
if I've moved,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
go on. No, go on.
If somebody else may be able to answer this as well. If I move and I do, and you said this to a certain extent, and I get the mail-in ballot, and then I decide to vote in person. If I vote in person on Tuesday, or if I go to vote in person on Tuesday, and they say, "Oh, somebody's already mailed in your ballot," can I still vote?
That's a tricky question in that. So you can't vote twice. So it's a question of partly which one comes to the, which one is recorded first. So it depends on that.
And not that I have any wild theories or speculation that there are mass amounts of fraud going on. I was just curious about that.
Right. No, I understand. And the other thing too is if you say you're living at 110 Main Street and you get, Joe Smith's ballot because he just moved out of the building, you just need to put it back in the mail. It's undeliverable. It'll go back to the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections and they will make a note of that. It does not get forwarded. A lot of people say, oh, I live in Montana now and I got my ballot information. I'm not sure how that happened because the way the code is on the envelopes is it goes back to the sender. It doesn't get forwarded. Now, could the mail get changed like that? I don't know. But there are some guardrails for that.
I would also just emphasize that I think what we're talking about was maybe a concern under the 2021 election where ballots were getting sent out. But this, to minimize the concerns Alderman Gay is bringing up, is definitely part of why we are switching to this application system. So I think what you're describing was a theoretical before, and now it is still maybe a theoretical, but a very much smaller theoretical.
Yeah, but thank you for that. And so obviously now you signed the application unless you've moved in 2 weeks.
Exactly.
It'll get to you. Yeah, thank you.
So we'll be working on that on a number of things. We're going to be increasing awareness across the board on a number of things with the with voters. In the last election was the first time we did a communication plan, and we've also started expanding that. So we've been working with Mitchell Stevenson, the city information officer, on that. And we're looking to identify resources for voter registration, highlight election dates, deadlines, polling locations, and ballot information. And even rumor control has become something that is necessary in today's environment. We'll be also continuing to research and work with Anne Arundel County Board of Elections in increasing the accuracy of the voter rolls. They control the voter rolls, we don't, but we can certainly assist with trying to get the get that out.
Thank you
Mitchell's
very
gonna-
much for being here. We have our City Public Information Officer, Mitchell Stevenson, joining us.
So Mitchell's going to comment a little bit just on the overall communication plan at this point.
Absolutely. Mitchell Stevenson, Public Information Officer for the city. I gave you all a copy of the communications plan that we've written for the 2025 municipal elections. This won't really begin to be deployed until probably July, because our first deadlines that are public facing, I think, are July 18th. There's our candidate filing deadline. So for the most part, all of this we'll be working on, getting everything prepared. We have set things we have to communicate to the public: filing deadlines, primary deadlines, registration deadlines, meet the candidates, all of those kind of things. Those things that we know about, we prepare ahead of time, and that way it's just a message deployment. Then we have what we also call our rapid response, which is the rumor control pieces. Some of that, I can give you two examples of that we had last time. One was that the drop box at Mount Olive was difficult to find, and we had heard that from multiple people. So I ran out, grabbed pictures of all the drop boxes, exactly where they were at each of the locations, put together a little social media post, push that out. Here's where the drop boxes are if you're having difficulty navigating. That was a little bit of an outlier because we were doing the all mail-in. We don't have that issue this time. We will again have drop boxes though. The other thing that we had was the drop box has a lock on it where they retrieve the ballots from, and there's a little flap where the ballots go in, but people were walking up to the drop boxes, seeing the lock, thinking that the drop box was not available or was locked. So we had to go, and I actually stuck my finger in and took a little picture and said, this is where your ballot goes. So those kinds of rapid response deployment. Also the things about, if you get a ballot at your house and the person doesn't live there anymore, don't mark the ballot, just return it to the Board of Elections. Those kind of things we'll do as we need to throughout the course of the elections. As people are confused or we have to straighten out misinformation, then that's what we'll be going for. And again, I didn't say this at the beginning, but we did this the last time. We are not partisan. We don't advocate for any specific candidates. We don't link to your campaign pages. We will link to the Board of Elections page on the city website, where if you've done your candidate filing and you've posted your website, is there any candidate or any ballot question. We are nonpartisan, so we're really just giving people the facts that they need to vote, register, all that stuff. And I'll take any
Anybody have
questions.
anything about the communications plan? My only note is I noticed in one of the sample things, and it may be because this is intended to come out sometime between July 16th and November 4th, but it says Annapolis municipal elections take place on November 4th. I think making sure that anytime we're talking about November 4th, we're also talking about September 16th, because we know that in a lot of our wards, those primary elections are very important.
Absolutely.
Just my only note. This
And
looks really
we'll-
impressive.
We'll be pushing this out a lot. So
Cool.
if there's anybody who doesn't know when the primary election day is, I'll be very disappointed, because we really try to reach out to everyone.
Thank you.
What about
Yeah, Alderman Gay.
the use of, are you using snail mail at all?
Snail mail is prohibitively expensive. We have 17,000 residents. It costs us about $17,000 to do a single mailing.
Yeah.
That's printing, postage, and mail house. On average, it's about $1 a piece. I run this communications plan on zero budget.
Does the city have access to an email database? Like, are people able to, because I know like I sign up for alerts from the city, etc. Are then we able to maybe send out an automatic email? I only ask that or the snail mail just because I know a lot of people aren't on social or they may not see it, etc.
Yeah, there's actually two component pieces to that. There's the public information that we do, but there's also the things that the Board of Elections does. And that's, I think, where you may be talking about like a sample ballot. So that,
Right.
yeah, sorry.
So they'll be getting, when they get their, it'll be highlighted when they get their application for mail-in ballot. We'll put it there. We'll also be putting things, going back to the whole thing of changing your address. So there are a limited number of things that we can put on those envelopes to encourage people to know what they are. We also found last time, we kind of did it late in the game, but posters seem to have been very effective. We tried doing some postings on the buses, but it was very expensive and it was really somewhat limited audience. So I think we're going to probably go more with some things like posters, get them out sooner and move them around and get people to know.
Just so you know, too, speaking of the posters and stuff like that, we can utilize the TV monitors at Pip Moyer. We can put flyers on on City of Annapolis Transit, also at the various windows, finance, permit counter, transportation window, Pip Moyer.
Library.
We did the library last time too. So there are other places that we can deploy things that is not a very pricey USPS snail mail. Yeah.
Yeah, Alderman Savage has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And excellent work on this. I think it's really, and I apologize ahead of time. Bit of a scheduling snafu. I didn't realize we had a meeting today, so I haven't had a chance to read this, but I think this is great work. And I guess one thing I would suggest related to the snail mail is that, what I find is most effective for my town hall meetings is just hand delivering flyers. And I'm not saying you have to do that, but I think if there were some materials that we could utilize, because I'll at some point probably before the election, I'll be having another town hall, and we'll probably have some residents, constituents be distributing flyers on the city's behalf. So I'd love to be able to give some out at the same time.
For sure. In the message deployment section of this document, we also have email addresses for homeowner associations. If people have updated the city, a lot of times the president will change or something like that. But if those are updated, we can also use those. We also have business groups, the central committees. When we send those things out, we ask them to distribute out from there. So if we can hit HOAs, churches, central committees, business groups, and ask them to share to their networks, that can also help expand our reach and reach people that maybe not be on social media.
Anything else on the communications plan? No? All right. Thank you for being here, Mitchell.
I did just want to mention one thing, because we didn't really have a plan in place for last time when COVID came. So I did add a new section for social unrest and pandemics, which now we can be prepared for so that hopefully we don't get.
I appreciate that.
We were prepared, we just didn't advertise it.
Lessons learned.
So, all right. Well,
All right.
thank you, Mitchell. So I think we're building on what was done the last time, and it will even be more far-reaching. Just moving on briefly to in-person voting. Like I mentioned earlier, all the polling locations will be the same, which I'm thrilled with, because it's the first time, and this is my third go-round. They've been consistent all around. We usually end up having to move them here and there, and all of the sites are really just been great to work with, and everything's pretty much in place. I've listed here the different wards, and there's always going to be some confusion. Someone's going to walk into City Hall and then realize that, oh, I'm in I'm in Ward 2 or something like that. So in that case, if you walk into the wrong ward where you are, you can vote, but you'd have to vote provisionally. So you'd be allowed to vote for mayor, but you wouldn't be able to vote for alderman. So we do, in that case, encourage people to go back to where their ward is.
Yeah, I saw Alderman Pendel Charles. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The last election, a new community was built in my ward, and some of them got ballots to go to Edgewater, to City Hall, and there was a bit of a confusion, but they didn't get ballots, I don't think, come to Mount Olive. I can talk with you about that offline.
Yeah,
I had talked to Ms. Watkins Eldridge about it the last time, and we were deciding what we needed to do, but I don't know if it ever, I'm assuming it got straightened out. but
I
just
believe
wanna-
that's all been submitted to
submitted.
the county, and that's
Okay.
all part of even the ward redistricting. Because what happens is that you're in a county precinct, but you're in a city ward.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people confuse the two, so they'll see that they're in precinct 6 and thinks that's Ward 6, and it's not. So I think I will double check, but I believe that's been taken care
Yes,
of.
Annapolis Towns at Neal Farm.
Right.
I think it's 4 or 5 streets, but 4 residences on. One
Mm-hmm. Right.
street doesn't have any residents.
Right, and there's always a couple of little places, I think that used to be, Fred Payone used to be upset because there were like 4 houses at the end of one street that was in a different ward than Ward 2, and I'm like, that's how the ward went, so.
Okay, thank you.
So
I saw a
again,
question from Alderman Gay.
Just quickly, no early voting.
no early voting, we don't have the technology to do it, or we don't have it.
Okay. Was that our decision, or was that the decision of?
We don't have we currently do not have the mechanism to do early voting.
Okay.
Early voting is like running another election, because you have to get all different equipment. It's expensive. Not saying you couldn't do it. It's a reason if you wanted to sink in with the state in terms of their elections. The county will, I think they've actually already started, have come around to all the polling locations just to check them for the cameras, safety. I mean, they do a very extensive checklist in terms of making sure that everything looks okay and meets their standards. Parking is also one of the areas that they look for. One of the things I want to mention is election judges. If you can encourage that with your constituents, we'll also be communicating it in the communication plan. We always need them. It always makes a great neighborhood feel if wards are staffed by people that live in their wards. And the pay has gone up. So it's $250 a day for most of the judges, $350, I think, for the chief judge. There is training. There is some virtual there's a virtual application. There is some training, and they do get paid for the training. In the presidential election, there was a $100 retention bonus if you had already served in the past. I don't know if that's something that, but it is one of our largest items, cost items, is for election judges. And we just need them. Any questions about polling locations? Actually, in the state of Maryland, if you are 16, you can be registered to vote. You're just not eligible to vote. So it really is an opportunity if high school students want to get community service. So they can be election judges even though they're not eligible to vote. Yeah. And I know that there's usually a push, encouragement over at Anne Arundel Community College as far as it's a long day. You have to be there usually about like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and you're there. Could be anywhere from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, so it is a long day. Okay, moving on to canvassing, which is the process of counting votes. In 2021, as in prior years, in accordance with city code, ballot envelopes could not be opened and processed until the close of the polls on the election day. So this is going towards your earlier question, Alderman Gay. And then canvassing began the Tuesday after the election. So many times people just assume whatever happened election night, that was the answer, that's what's the official. It's not. The counting actually doesn't really continue or actually count until the Tuesday after the election. But with the advent of mail-in ballots, that has kind of shifted people's feelings about when we can start opening and counting ballots. We are going in line with what the state has been doing, which is we will begin canvassing 8 business days prior to the election. So for the primary election, that's September 4th, and for the general election, it's October 23rd. So on those days, the Board of Elections will become the Board of Canvassers, and those any mail-in ballots that, or even mailed-in ballots, any mail-in ballots will be start to be processed. Now they're not; those totals are not official. Those totals are not public. Okay, it's just getting ahead of the numbers. So we'll do it for 1 day, possibly 2 days, and then we'll stop. So once we stop, we'll go back to being the Board of Elections, and then during that time period, ballots will still be coming in, but they won't be counted because we're getting ready for the election. But the numbers that have been counted on those 1 or 2 days of canvassing will be added to the numbers that are collected on Election Day to give unofficial results. The next canvass date will be the Tuesday after the election, where we finish counting mail-in ballots, and also we'll be counting all the provisional ballots from Election Day.
One for clarity and then one on this. I'm assuming city employees will have off on the city election days.
I don't know.
I noticed City Hall is used on one of the,
The chambers are used, yes.
and they allow you to vote while the business is still in operation.
That's what we've been doing.
Oh, okay. I never voted here, so. And then would they live stream the counting, or what is the what allows there to be transparency for the for our constituency?
For the canvassing?
Yeah.
Well, the canvassing is open to the public. I believe in the past, the county has done some live streaming. I don't know if they did it in this past election. We have not necessarily done it, but the public is more than welcome to go up to the county. It's up in Glen Burnie. I do believe that in 2021, I think we actually had someone that wanted to attend and did not have transportation, and I believe the city clerk arranged for it or something.
Fantastic.
It is a very fascinating thing to watch. It's very specific. I was very heartened by in the 2021 election, which was a bit tense and stressful in terms of the political climate at the time, that some of the people that came that were like, had suspicions or were kind of show me, by the end of the process, they were like, thank you so much. I understand the process so much better, So I really encourage people, especially if they have concerns or particular questions, that they do attend it. It is interesting. So again, the final canvass will be conducted on the Tuesday after the election. So I think we'll have better numbers than we had in 2021, but we're not going to have the final numbers.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
Yes, so canvassing is not in code yet. I should have prefaced that. It's not in code yet, but that's what we are asking. So you should be getting it. I'm sorry?
And there's a deadline for you to introduce
As
that
far
first?
Regina Watkins Eldridge is taking care of it along with Cynthia
Okay.
Reuter. So it's
Okay.
been drafted. It just needs to be reviewed and approved by the board. So is there a specific deadline you're thinking of? Oh,
I
okay.
don't have it in front of me.
Oh,
but
okay.
There's a specific deadline by which we introduce any.
Okay.
But I believe the deadline's a couple months from now. So if there's an earlier deadline for when we have to have all the information
Right.
to them, and then one by which we can introduce. So if you're saying it's already been drafted,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, it's been drafted. It needs a couple of tweaks. But when I asked Regina Watkins Eldridge the other day, she said we had time.
Great.
But thank you. And that's the only remaining piece that we're looking at.
think it's right around the same time of their deadline of July the 18th. Might be something. I would still recommend, to your point, getting it in probably like in March.
All right, so moving on to ballot questions, which is something that I'm really pleased that we've managed to work through. And this has been legislation that's been passed. It was 1924. The process in the past had been, it said, it gave all the different things that you needed, like even the size of the paper you needed to use and that sort of thing, but it didn't give you the percentage or the number of signatures that you needed. So we would get inquiries about putting a question on the ballot. We're like, we don't have a number. We now have a number. So it is 10% of the city registered voters. So that number can change. So it's approximately 28 to 3,000 names that would need to go on ballot, would need to go on a petition for a ballot. We also worked in there that there needs to be a minimum of 250 signatures from each of the wards. And that was meant that we wanted to make sure that this was something that was wanted across the city and not just ward-centric. We had seen it when we looked at other municipalities, and this was one of the, we thought was a good practice to incorporate. So that is if a citizen wants to put a question on the ballot, they can. Another thing that is new is that the city council can now put a question on the ballot. It has not been something that has been delineated in the past. And it was somewhat brought up because, if you recall, in the 2001 Charter Revision Commission, they recommended that the issues or the questions about nonpartisan elections and syncing the city elections in with the state federal cycle be put as ballot questions. As you may know, this is something we've heard from the last, I think, 3 charter revision commissions where they've asked for consideration of nonpartisan elections and also the syncing into the cycle. So the Charter Commission, which I was also on, thought, okay, let's try it as a ballot question. If people, if we're not really sure, or if the council's uncomfortable, or wants to hear what the public has to say, this is a way of doing it. So it not limited to elections, but it is a new tool for the city council to utilize if they choose. Again, if you want to do that, you got to do it soon. Because anything going on the ballot, we need to have, I think it's July 28th with the candidacy. Any questions about that? Campaign fund reporting, something I know that's near and dear to your hearts. We've been working with the city IT department to make it a bit more user-friendly for the candidates, for treasurers, but also for the public so that they can view it and understand it a little bit more. The main thing that we're doing is trying to standardize we're trying to simplify the templates, and we're now making it so that the entire form is fillable online. And so we're hoping that everybody will use our templates when they do their Excel spreadsheets so that all of our columns line up. And so we're still working on that. I expect it to be ready for testing in the next, sometime in March, and we'll do some testing with it. But I think it will be a little bit simpler. We're also outlining and defining some of the things. So when we talk about, say, fundraising, we're defining what is fundraising, what's considered fundraising, what is considered, for instance, we talk about TV ads. In the past, we've talked about TV ads and radio ads, but nobody's talked about social media. So we're trying to update some of that terminology. Another legislative change was O 2024, which talked about surplus funds when closing out a campaign fund account. In the past, the 2 options were to give it to the city to offset election costs or to give it to the central committees. We've now added the ability for it to be given to a 501c3 nonprofit in the city of Annapolis. So we're hoping that this is something that will assist the closing out of some accounts and give other options. This is consistent with the state. The state allows it. Another thing that may not be as popular, is amended reports will now incur late fees. One of the challenges we've had at the board when we review them is that we send out the amended reports and then it could be, every month we're sending out, please send it in, please send it in. So now we're going to attach late fees and see if that assists with some of the compliance. Most of the amended reports, I should say many of the amended reports have pretty minor things that need to be changed. And so I think it's easy for people to forget, oh, I just have to change this and send it back in. But we are trying to increase compliance with it. Late fees used to be confusing because we had pre-election and post-election fees that differed. And so we just made them all one. So it's $20 a day for a maximum of $500. Another change is that late fees can now come out of campaign funds, which in the past they were the responsibility of the candidate themselves. Questions about that? One final note, wanted to address the task force to study the city municipal elections and the recommendations they had. The Board of Supervisors of Elections has worked to address the recommendations that were directly mentioned us. You may remember the original resolution had the recommendations coming to the Board of Elections, and that was amended and changed. And so the recommendations came to the council, not to us. So what we've done in looking at them is we've taken the ones that were addressed to us and have worked on them to some degree. Most notably drafting the regulations clarifying the process for placing questions on the ballot, looking at best practices for voter rolls, and also starting to look at if we can come up with a searchable database for the campaign fund reports. While any further changes cannot affect the 2025 elections, the board is certainly willing and open to work with the city council on any of the other recommendations that you may direct towards the board to do. If you were to change something now, let's say you say, okay, we want nonpartisan. That's not going to happen in 2025. So 2025 elections are pretty much, but there's other work that can be done. There's some of those recommendations that can move forward, and we're more than happy to either assist with the research for that or the drafting of, say, I know we've talked about expanding the Board of Supervisors of Elections. If that's something that you all would like the board to give feedback or draft, we'd like that. We just need to hear from you in terms of if there's something that the council would like for us to be working on, particularly of those recommendations.
So if the clerk's office has to submit legislation, that won't impact this upcoming, it won't count towards us then, right? Because then we would have to vote on it. And
well, the canvassing is the only legislation that is still outstanding that hasn't been submitted to you all yet.
so
All the others are done.
Will, I'm just slightly confused there. So the canvassing will remain the same for the 2025 election and will be changed in.
No, I'm sorry, I understand the confusion. That will go for the 2025 because
Okay.
that's in draft right now. That's in process. But something like, say, nonpartisan elections, or if that's the one that just jumps to mind, open primaries, things like that, is not something that we can work on now to get into. But we could help set it up that if it's something that you want to think about for the next.
And Alderman Savage has a question, and then I think Alderwoman O'Neill is going to take over for me. I actually have. So, Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just a few things I know on my radar that I'd like to, if I get reelected, to work on for the next election, because and maybe I'll get it in before the end of the year term. But in any case, one would be reviewing the petitioning requirements for how we call, it might be called non-major parties, basically the third party and unaffiliated candidates. I believe they have to get, or no, I think it's just unaffiliated that have to get petition signatures to get on the ballot.
To get what?
To get on the ballot?
Yes, if to get on the ballot, an unaffiliated needs 100 registered voters signing the petition.
There's
500 if it's for mayor.
There's been some questions about that I've heard from the public as far as just removing any barriers we can to getting more people to run. So, if the board has any thoughts on that, or, best practices from other jurisdictions, I think that'd be good to know about.
Yeah, I know that there's been talk about also equalizing the fees that go into that. I think the general feedback from the other side has been 100 signatures is considered not an insurmountable number as such. And also, the advantage to an unaffiliated is that they don't run in the primary. So you may get some push to say, okay, if you're, you could see that it could go the other way too, that unaffiliated would have to, then you'd come up with a way in which they'd be in the unaffiliated. And of course, Alderman Huntley just left, and that's the kind of thing that leads to ranked choice voting. So I hear what you're saying, and we can certainly look at it, but I don't see a whole lot. To my knowledge at this point, I haven't seen how that's worked other places, but we can look at it.
Yeah, I'm just curious what they've done, and I know, that's a good point about how they will only be appearing in the general election. But we've very rarely had any races that have had more than even 3 candidates, so I'm not sure there's much of a danger of having too many candidates on the ballot. I mean, the most I can think of is, I think, when Moyer was running for re-election, we had a number of people running for mayor, along with, I think, some unaffiliateds.
Yeah, there haven't. We just went through the process with a candidate for this upcoming election. It was pretty smooth. I might be worthwhile to get the feedback from him in terms of, going through it. I think they submitted 156 signatures, and of those 156, 146 were accepted. And so that was all done up at the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections. So it's certainly something to look at. The other thing to look at is, how do we get people to run? And that's kind of a gray area in terms of the role of the Board of Elections as opposed to the general public. The other impediment to unaffiliated in the past that's been mentioned is the Hatch Act.
Yeah. That's another question of mine.
Well, I know that our Office of Law has looked into it and says that their opinion, it's not an impediment. There is a disclaimer, if you read the Hatch Act, that does allow, if there is a concentration of federal workers in a certain area, such as Annapolis, there are exemptions. And so when it's come up with specific people, we've encouraged them. You need to talk, you can talk to your their Hatch Act person or their contact. We can't do that. And so far, we haven't had anybody, to my knowledge, that has done that. But our understanding is it's not the impediment that a lot of people expect it to be. It also depends, too, on what your position is. So certain positions, it may be more difficult than other positions. But I agree with you. We'd love to see more candidates coming forth. And in the city of Annapolis right now, unaffiliated is the largest percentage of registered voters.
Yeah. Can we get that posted maybe on the city website somewhere?
What's that?
The analysis you said you received regarding the potential exemptions to that.
As he worked, I will certainly talk with the city attorney about it.
And can you share that with the council?
I will check on it.
The other thing which I think you're aware of that I want to change is that dropped a couple years ago because I think I missed the deadline, but is moving the primary date. I still have a lot of concerns that as a candidate, we only have, we have the whole summer to run a whole race, but really focus on the party affiliation for the primary because they're the ones who can vote in the primary. But then we only have a month and a half between September to November to reach everybody else in the ward and also raise the same amount of money. And it just seems like a very weird spacing for the elections. I think I know you have some concerns about staffing, but we haven't tried it. And I know the state does primary elections. They moved their date a couple years ago. So if there are recommendations from the commission, from the board, one way or another, that might be,
Well,
it would be good to see.
I mean, certainly if that's a request from you all, we can look into it. The last time it was raised, the challenge at that time was that we didn't have enough time to do it.
Yeah.
And if you do an earlier primary, well, it was a disadvantage at the time, but it could be an advantage here. It usually will fall into a different fiscal year. So in that year, when it was proposed, there was no funding for that fiscal year to do it, because a lot of the expenses occur even if it's in a July date, a lot of the expenses are incurred in the previous fiscal year. So that would be something that would take some preparation to do that. You also think about vacations and a number of things like that also factor into it. But it's also a reason to consider going with the state-federal election cycle.
But I think you know my opinion on that too.
So, well, I do have some feedback for you in terms of drop-off rates, which I know is one of really the only
What do you mean
the
by
major
drop-off rates?
major thing I hear from people that are concerned about going with the state or the federal cycle is that the Annapolis ballot will be at the end, and people are concerned about what we call the down ballot drop-off rate. And it's gotten a lot more attention in the last election cycles, because when I first looked at it, there wasn't much research, but there is now a group called Smart Elections that's really looking at it on a national basis. When I looked at it originally, what you'll see is if you have a long ballot, whether it be the presidential and then the city, or governor's race and then the city, you worry about people that get down to here and they don't bother with the city. However, the turnout rate in those races, usually in Maryland, could be, say, 60 to 70%. And then if you have a drop-off rate of 3 to 6%, you're still way ahead than if you're in an off-cycle year when you have, say, 40% at best. So if you just, say 3,000, registered voter in the city of Annapolis, and you have even a 60% turnout rate, you've got 18,000. I'm not doing my math correctly, but you have maybe 18,000. And if you've got a drop-off rate of 3, so you've got maybe 600 or something that are going to drop off. But if
That's
that's
for like undervoting your
Yeah.
bases mean.
but 40, you have 40% of 30,000, you've got 12,000 voters. Your numbers are still going to be better
Yeah.
if you went with the cycle.
I mean, for me, my primary metric is not turnout. It's my primary goal is because we care so much about city issues that they have the prominence, the focus that we think they deserve. And I think if they're subsumed in a state or county elections, or not, they're not going to get paid attention to. I mean, you see that because we have groups now actually reaching out, preparing for debates and forums for our upcoming municipal elections, and I just don't think you get it. I think you'd get voter fatigue in that sense because it's crammed in. I'd worry that candidates door knocking, there's going to be door knock fatigue because they're having so many people knocking at the door. That's going to give, I think, those running a less chance to really engage and be heard. I mean, I know it would probably save us money to join one of those other elections and probably increase turnout, but at what cost? I think the cost would be, in my mind, too great as far as just diluting city attention and dialogue.
Right. No, I could appreciate all that. I mean, Hagerstown in 2011, their city council did a ballot question, and the city voters chose to go with the state cycle. And in just talking with them, they've been pretty happy with that. They may be a good resource in terms of talking to any of the candidates that have run there to experience that.
Hagerstown, you said?
You raised the cost of it. I think that's why you don't want to make that the major thing with running an election. It is a reality. It's also a reality that we're very fortunate that the Maryland State Board of Elections assists us with running our municipal elections at a greatly reduced price, that they provide their staff without cost. If they were to say, you need to run your own elections, say in 2029, I would expect the cost could be $500,000. So
Well, I mean,
that's another factor. I mean, I know it's not the one that we like to think about, but, you know, and again, going back, to Alderman Gay's question about early voting, signature verification, all of those things require software, require maintenance. It's expensive. It's expensive because of the need for security and for the ability to make these elections as fair and as consistent and secure as possible.
I mean, personally, I think it's worth it if you're talking about a healthier local democracy.
Right. And that's fine. It's just, it's preparing though. So.
Alderman Gay.
Thank you. Are we now eligible to tap into the county's state financing program, essentially where,
Public funds. Not that I'm aware of, because our elections are different. I know the county is now doing it. It was something that the task force looked at and suggested that the council consider looking at it.
I was just curious because since we're so intertwined with the county stuff, that was my.
I believe that type of funding would come from the city, though, so the city would have to put up that type of funding. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for having me here today. Hopefully I've answered your questions. Please.
I'm sorry, the alderman from Ward 1 wanted you to speak about ranked choice.
Okay.
He didn't really say, he just tapped it.
That's fine. And he and I have talked about ranked choice voting before. We've actually, the board back in July had a presentation from two members of the ranked choice voting. I don't know, it's a coalition as such. Again, it is something that at this point we're not necessarily prepared to offer. If you look at the number of instances where it would even apply in the past couple of elections, I mean, we don't have even in many of our wards more than one candidate. Now, of course, this year we do have one ward that has 3 candidates. But it's not that we can't do it. It's just a question, again, of guidance from the council. I mean, are you talking about ranked choice for the across the board, or are you talking about ranked choice in the Democrat race and the Republican race? Because you can do it intra-party as opposed to across the board. I think the general feeling of the board is that it's not a priority necessarily right now. You also, again, going back to software, you have to have software for it. My understanding is the state has the software for it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can access it at the municipal level. The state does not have it. It would be difficult. Let me put it this way. If the city were to choose to do ranked choice voting, I'm not confident, actually, that the state would assist us with running our election. That doesn't say it may not change in the future, but current environment right now is not that. That's a little different for nonpartisan, though. Nonpartisan seems to be a more open possibility.
Alderman Savage.
Yeah, just on that point, and Alderman Huntley and I are working a bit on this, exploring the possibility, and we are in the process of speaking with the state and county to see feasibility of moving in that direction to RCV. It is utilized by Tacoma Park. They're looking at trying to do it in Montgomery County. They're trying to get state approval, but the benefit of us being a municipality is we don't have to get state approval to make these kind of changes. Unless we move our election year to be with the state or federal elections, and then that really ties our hand because we have to have the same method of voting as they do in their elections. That's the other benefit of having us be separate election years, is we have more autonomy. But, RCV, I think Alderman Huntley and I are interested because the benefits are it ensures whomever wins with a majority. But to Ms. Leahy's point, most of our races only have 2 probably on average. Sometimes we only have 1, but we do have a handful that have had 3 or more, and that's where you do see the benefit. especially for mayoral races and some of the more, I don't know what to call them, but the more popular wards, I guess, of 1 and 8 and tend to have more, candidates and 2. Yeah. But, so and it also removes all kind of spoiler impact from third parties because it does give people that choice. It would require some amount of education, obviously, but we're not even sure yet if it's feasible. That's what we're trying to uncover
Right.
first, and it may have a cost. We're trying to figure out.
Right. Well,
too.
Tacoma Park runs their own elections. So if you're going to see it other places, at least in Maryland, they're running their own elections.
But they have
which-
their own separate machines, I believe, to do that.
Right. You have to have it's like it's just part of running the election. So if you choose to run an election, if the city of Annapolis chooses to run their own elections, you have to get your own machines, you get your vendors, and then you get the software to run the ranked choice voting. So it's
No, it's really
certainly,
not, because we've looked into it, and
I
the
think-
software is actually, they have it, it's available, the machines are capable, the software is capable. It's just a matter of if we can get the state to certify the machines for use in our own election, which probably won't be a problem. And then we have to go to the county to see if it's feasible because they're running our election as far as what they would need. There may be some cost sharing. We have to pay for the software, but there are options. But that's one of the things we're trying to figure out is
right. I have to say, from what we hear, though, nonpartisan is something that has more interest than ranked choice voting, possibly because it's understood a little bit more. And something too that came up in the task force and we've talked about is having an open primary, which again may be something that can be done while we still work with the state. So an open primary can be run a number of different ways, and so either way it involves our unaffiliated voters, which is, I think one of the reasons we don't have more candidates is because people are unaffiliated, and they're not having maybe some of the support that would help them. In any case, an open primary could be that if you're unaffiliated, you can go and there'll be a Democrat ballot for the primary and a Republican ballot. And you can walk in and say, I'm unaffiliated, I want to vote Democrat. You get a ballot for the Democrats, and that's how you vote. The other option is to have an open ballot where everybody is listed. And sometimes in a city such as our size, that may be something where RCV actually is more necessary in terms of putting everybody together. So Republicans, Democrats, and unaffiliated would be on one ballot. And so then the decision becomes, how do you choose from that? Do you choose just the top 2, and does one have to have a certain percentage, or do you do the ranked choice? So those are all questions once you have to figure out what path you want to go down.
I think,
McGee?
I think just to that point, I would be, obviously we have no choice now, and it'd have to be into a next election. But I think even as a private citizen, people would be like, I think ranked choice is, to your point, it's just, when you send somebody into the booth, you want to say, this takes 5 seconds of your time. You don't want to have to send them in there doing math formulas about how I'm calculating my vote. Now I'm trying to make sure this person can get to the top. And so I always say, as my teacher in high school said, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. You're Dem, you're Republican, you vote. And also, to this point, I think in a city our size, as you've alluded to, I would be precautious of cost. You don't want to get into the habit of spending $800,000 or whatever it could be for an election because you got to buy. And I'm curious to see your data too now about the software, et cetera, and all that stuff. But I feel like, if you propose that to our constituencies, like, hey, we have an option to change our voting, but it's going to cost up close to $1 million. I feel like they would be like, stick with what we got.
It's certainly something at the state level, there's also a need for updating software all across the board, I believe, and also with elections. And so they're grappling with it also. Last time we looked into tapping into the state system was for doing the campaign fund reports. And when we talked to the vendor, there was a reason that we couldn't tap into the state from, I believe, the vendor standpoint, and the quote we were given was $300,000 for that type of software, and that did not include maintenance. So we didn't go that route. So we're doing our own thing. It's not quite to the level that we'd like it to be, but I think it's pretty workable.
Right.
Anything
Are there
else?
any other questions? Thank
Well-
you so much for this very
well-
thorough report. It's
Well,
nice
thank
to
you for having me.
hear
I
all the
like
ideas.
like the opportunity. And please, if, our meetings are the third Thursday of every month. We have one tonight. Please feel free to come, especially if you have specific things that you'd like for us to do. We always, appreciate, being involved in the process if you want to have us start working on something. Expanding the Board of Supervisors of Elections would be something we'd love to get a direction from you all if you want us to draft that, but just let us know.
We can do that.
Okay. I don't know how that works, if you have to send us a letter or what the deal is, but I'm told that we have to get a direction from the city council,
Oh, direction.
directive or something.
All right. Thank you. Is there anything else for good of the order? Meeting adjourned.